September 1944. The Allied juggernaut is rolling across France like an unstoppable steel wave. Nazi Germany is bleeding from 1,000 wounds. The liberation of Paris has already happened. The Third Reich's western defenses are crumbling, and in eastern France, nestled among rolling hills and ancient vineyards, sits a medieval fortress that's about to become the stage for one of World War II's most chilling exchanges. Inside those thick stone walls, 1,500 German soldiers wait. Their commander, a Wehrmacht major whose name would soon be forgotten by history, has just made a decision that will seal the fate of hundreds of men. He's refused an offer of honorable surrender. But he hasn't just said no. He's done something far more dangerous. He's challenged General George S. Patton. "Tell General Patton that if he wants this fortress," the major declared with absolute conviction, "he'll have to kill me to get it." It was meant to sound heroic, unbreakable, the kind of dramatic statement that rallies exhausted troops and makes enemies hesitate. The kind of line that sounds magnificent when you say it, that makes you feel like you're standing on the right side of history, defending honor and duty against impossible odds. Patton's response? 4 words that would echo through military history. "I can arrange that." What happened next wasn't a battle. It wasn't a siege. It was a masterclass in applied violence, a systematic dismantling of both stone and spirit that lasted less than 12 hours and proved one terrifying truth. When you dare George Patton to do something, you'd better be absolutely certain you want him to do it. Because he will. To understand why this fortress mattered, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture of the war in September 1944. The situation in Western Europe had transformed dramatically since D-Day on June 6th. Operation Overlord had punched a hole in Hitler's Atlantic and wall. The subsequent Operation Cobra had shattered German defensive lines in Normandy. The Falaise Pocket had trapped and destroyed entire German armies. Paris had been liberated on August 25th to scenes of jubilation that shocked even hardened war correspondents. Now, Patton's Third Army was doing what it did best, exploiting breakthrough and racing across French countryside at speeds that made traditional warfare look like it was being conducted in slow motion. His armored columns were covering distances in days that would have taken months in World War I. Fuel and ammunition were the only things limiting his advance, not German resistance. But, and this is crucial, rapid advance creates problems of its own. Supply lines stretch, communication becomes difficult, and you leave behind pockets of German resistance that can threaten those precious supply convoys bringing fuel, ammunition, and food to your spearhead units. This is where our fortress enters the picture. The fortress itself was a relic of an older kind of warfare, built centuries earlier, probably during the era when France was a patchwork of rival powers and every nobleman needed a stronghold to defend his territory. Thick stone walls, maybe 10 to 15 feet thick in places, natural elevation providing commanding views of surrounding countryside, limited approaches that could be covered by defensive fire, underground chambers and tunnels that had sheltered soldiers and supplies through dozens of conflicts. By 1944 standards, it was obsolete. Modern artillery and air power had made fixed fortifications vulnerable. The famous Maginot Line had been bypassed entirely by German forces in 1940. But that doesn't mean the fortress was useless. Location matters. This particular fortress sat on a critical road junction. Multiple supply routes converged there, making it a natural choke point for logistics. American forces advancing eastward toward Germany needed those roads. They needed continuous streams of trucks bringing fuel, ammunition, medical supplies, and replacement equipment to keep the offensive momentum. A German garrison holding that fortress could do serious damage. Not by defeating American forces in battle, they couldn't, but by forcing supply convoys to take longer alternate routes. In mobile warfare, where tanks consume fuel at astonishing rates and ammunition expenditure is measured in the tons per day, logistical delays matter enormously. So the fortress couldn't be bypassed. It had to be taken. Inside, the German garrison was a mixed force, the kind of unit composition common in the chaotic final year of the Third Reich. Wehrmacht infantry from various divisions, some artillery crews, support personnel, possibly some stragglers from units that had been shattered in earlier battles and were now trying to regroup. About 1,500 men total, according to American intelligence estimates. Their commander was a major, not a famous general, not a legendary panzer commander, or a holder of the Knight's Cross. Just a mid-level officer who found himself in command of a position that was about to become very important for all the wrong reasons. This major had sworn oaths to Hitler, to Germany, to the Wehrmacht. In the German military culture of 1944, those oaths still held powerful psychological weight, even as the war was clearly lost. Surrendering meant breaking those oaths. It meant admitting defeat. For an officer raised in the Prussian military tradition, these weren't small matters. But the major was about to learn that personal honor means nothing when it collides. George S. Patton Jr. had a reputation that preceded him like thunder before a storm. By September 1944, he was arguably the most famous and most feared American general in Europe. His Third Army had broken out of Normandy, raced across France, and left a trail of destroyed German units in its wake. German intelligence officers tracked his movements obsessively, knowing that wherever Patton was, the main American thrust would follow. But Patton was also practical in ways that don't always make it into popular portrayals. Yes, he was aggressive. Yes, he believed in rapid maneuver and relentless attack. Yes, he drove his subordinates hard and accepted risks that made more cautious commanders uncomfortable. But he wasn't wasteful. Patton understood something fundamental about warfare that more romantic commanders often missed. The fastest way to take a position is for the enemy to surrender it. Every battle takes time. Every battle costs casualties. Every battle consumes ammunition and fuel and medical supplies. If you can achieve your objective without fighting, you've just saved time and resources that can be applied to the next objective. So, Patton's standard operating procedure when encountering German defensive positions was straightforward. Offer surrender first. Not out of mercy, though Patton wasn't needlessly cruel despite his tough guy persona. Not out of humanitarian concern, though he wasn't indifferent to casualties, but out of cold efficiency. A surrendered position costs nothing and delays nothing. A position taken by force costs both. The terms offered to the German major were standard, and by 1944 standards quite generous. Surrender immediately. Your troops will be disarmed and taken as prisoners of war. They will be treated according to Geneva Convention regulations. Proper food, medical care, shelter, protection from combat. They will survive the war. When Germany surrenders, they'll go home to their families. Your alternative is to fight a battle you cannot win against forces you cannot defeat. You will lose. Your position will fall. The only question is how many of your men die first. These weren't empty threats. By September 1944, German commanders knew exactly what American firepower looked like. They'd seen entire defensive lines obliterated by artillery. They'd watched as American air superiority turned daylight movement into suicide. They'd witnessed American material superiority, the endless streams of tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, and supplies that just kept coming. A smart German commander in a hopeless position would take the offer, preserve his men's lives, accept that the war was lost anyway. Understand that surrendering to Americans meant relative safety compared to surrendering to Soviets on the Eastern Front, or dying in a pointless last stand. The major wasn't smart, or perhaps more accurately, he valued abstract concepts like honor and duty more than concrete realities like his men's lives. When Patton's messenger arrived under white flag, the universal symbol of truce and negotiation that had been respected in warfare for centuries, the major received him formally. The terms were presented clearly. Surrender, save lives. End this without bloodshed. The major's response has been recorded in various forms and different accounts, but the essential message was consistent. Tell General Patton that if he wants this fortress, he'll have to kill me to get it. Some versions add more dramatic flourishes. Perhaps he mentioned duty to the fatherland. Perhaps he invoked his oath to fight to the last. Perhaps he spoke of honor requiring resistance even in the face of certain defeat. But the core message was clear. I will not surrender. I will fight. You will have to kill me. It was meant to be inspiring, the kind of defiant statement that great commanders make in stories and movies. The kind of line that's supposed to make your enemy respect you, maybe even intimidate them a little. The major probably expected Patton to be impressed by this display of courage, maybe even offer better terms, or conduct a more cautious operation to minimize casualties out of respect for a brave opponent. He fundamentally misunderstood who he was dealing with. When the messenger returned to American lines and reported the major's statement, Patton's staff braced for his reaction. Would he be angry at having his generous offer rejected? Would he be insulted by the major's defiance? Patton was neither. According to multiple accounts from officers present, his response was utterly matter-of-fact, almost clinical in its pragmatism. The major says we have to kill him. Let's not disappoint him. What followed was vintage Patton, not the Hollywood version of tanks charging and guns blazing, but the real Patton who understood that overwhelming preparation makes actual combat almost anticlimactic. He immediately began issuing orders, and those orders revealed a military mind operating at peak efficiency. Step 1. Complete encirclement. Not just blocking the roads, not just establishing observation posts, a total hermetic seal. Patton ordered infantry units to surround the fortress at positions close enough to prevent any movement in or out, but far enough to be safe from defensive fire. Engineers would assess and, if possible, cut any water lines feeding the fortress. The well inside might provide drinking water, but it wouldn't support 1,500 men indefinitely under combat conditions. Forward observers would establish positions with direct line of sight to the fortress, ready to call in artillery strikes with precision. The message was clear: nobody leaves, no reinforcements arrive, no supplies get through. The fortress was now an island, completely cut off from the rest of the German army. Step 2. Artillery concentration. Patton ordered every available heavy artillery piece within range to be registered on the fortress. This wasn't random bombardment. This was precision targeting of specific structures and defensive positions. The Third Army had access to 150 by 5mm howitzers, the Long Tom, capable of throwing 95-pound high-explosive shells over 14 miles. These weren't designed for suppression fire, they were designed for destruction. Forward, observers would identify specific targets: the main gate, artillery positions inside the fortress, suspected command bunkers, ammunition and storage areas, barracks, sections of wall that could be breached. Each artillery battery received targeting coordinates, firing schedules, and ammunition allocations. The bombardment would be methodical, not wasteful. Each shell would have a purpose. Step 3. Air support coordination. By September 1944, Allied air superiority over Western Europe was absolute. The Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self, unable to contest American and British control of the skies. Patton requested P-47 Thunderbolts, the famous Jug fighter bomber that had become one of the most effective ground attack aircraft in the Allied arsenal. These aircraft could carry 2,500 pounds of bombs or rockets, and their 850 caliber machine guns could shred soft targets. The airstrikes wouldn't be carpet bombing. They would be precision attacks on specific targets. 8. Identified by ground observers and intelligence. The major's command post, the main ammunition dump, artillery positions that survived the initial bombardment. Timing would be coordinated with the artillery. First, soften targets with shells. Then, when German defenders were suppressed and disorganized, hit them with airstrikes. Then, resume artillery to prevent recovery. Step 4. Psychological warfare. This is where Patton's approach became truly diabolical. He ordered loudspeakers brought up and positioned around the fortress. These would broadcast directly to the German garrison. Not propaganda, not threats, but a simple schedule. At 0600 hours, artillery bombardment will commence targeting the northern wall and main gate. At 0800 hours, airstrikes will target command facilities and ammunition storage. At 1000 hours, infantry assault will begin through breach sections. Surrender is still possible. Any soldier who wishes to live may exit with hands raised. You will be treated according to Geneva Convention regulations. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. Imagine being inside that fortress, listening to a disembodied voice calmly describing exactly how you're going to be destroyed, hour by hour. Imagine watching the minutes tick down to your scheduled destruction. Imagine looking at your commander, the man whose defiant oath has trapped you here, and wondering if his honor is worth your life. Step 5. The timeline. Finally, Patton made clear to his own commanders that this operation would be fast, not careful. The major wanted a fight. They'd give him one, but it would be so overwhelming, so precisely coordinated. so absolutely crushing that it would be over in hours, not days. American casualties were to be minimized not through caution, but through overwhelming firepower. Don't send men into danger when artillery and bombs can do the work. Don't risk lives clearing bunkers when you can. Collapse the bunkers entirely. The message to American troops was equally straightforward. The enemy has been offered surrender. They refused. What happens next is their choice, not ours. You will follow orders, apply maximum force, and end this quickly. This wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge for the Major's defiance. It was something colder and more frightening. Professional execution of a military task, stripped of emotion, optimized for efficiency. Patton had essentially transformed a potentially costly siege into an industrial process. Input: one German-held fortress. Process: systematic application of high explosives and combined arms coordination. Output: American-controlled position with minimal friendly casualties. The Major had challenged Patton to kill him. Patton had designed a machine specifically for that purpose. Now, he just had to turn it on. The assault was scheduled for dawn, but the psychological operation began immediately, as darkness fell over the French. Countryside, on what would be the German garrison's last night in the fortress, the loudspeakers started broadcasting. Not constantly. That would allow the Germans to tune it out as background noise. But periodically, every 30 minutes or so, the same calm, precise message in German. Soldiers of the German garrison, tomorrow at dawn, American artillery will begin systematic bombardment of your position. This will be followed by airstrikes and infantry assault. Your position cannot be defended. Your commander's oath will not protect you. Surrender is still possible. Exit with your hands raised, and you will be treated as prisoners of war under international law. Inside the fortress, the Major tried to maintain morale and discipline. According to testimony from survivors interrogated after the battle, he gave speeches about duty, honor, and the warrior tradition. He reminded his troops of their oaths. He spoke of making the Americans pay a heavy price for their advance. But his words were competing with another voice, the cold, mechanical certainty of those loudspeakers describing exactly what was going to happen, and his troops were exhausted. Many had been fighting and retreating for weeks since the Normandy breakout. They'd seen German defensive positions overrun repeatedly. They'd watched as American material superiority ground down even the most determined resistance. They knew the war was lost. The question wasn't whether they could win. The question was whether they wanted to die for a commander's pride. As the night wore on, cracks began to appear in the garrison's unity. Junior officers approached the Major, suggesting that perhaps surrender wasn't dishonorable given the circumstances. Perhaps their duty was to preserve their men's lives rather than throw them away in a hopeless fight. The Major refused to consider it. He'd made his statement. He'd challenged Patton. To back down now would be cowardice, betrayal of everything he believed about military honor. Some soldiers tried to slip away in darkness, hoping to surrender individually. The Major had placed guards specifically to prevent this, with orders to shoot deserters. Whether any were actually shot remains unclear, but the threat was real enough to keep most troops in place. Meanwhile, outside the fortress, American forces were conducting final preparations. Artillery crews were sleeping in shifts near their guns, ready to commence firing at first light. Infantry units were reviewing approach routes through expected breach points. Combat engineers were preparing demolition charges for stubborn strongpoints. Medical personnel were establishing aid stations in anticipation of casualties, German more than American, based on the battle plan. P-47 Thunderbolt pilots at nearby airstrips were being briefed on their targets, studying reconnaissance photos of the fortress, checking weather conditions for the morning strikes. The machine Patton had designed was ready. Every component was in place. All that remained was to execute the plan. As dawn approached, some German soldiers inside the fortress wrote final letters to families, though they had no way to mail them. Others prayed. Some simply sat in numb silence, waiting for what they knew was coming. The Major spent the night in his command bunker, perhaps reflecting on his decision, perhaps still convinced he was doing the right thing. We'll never know his final thoughts. What we do know is that when the first rays of sunlight touched the fortress walls, the machinery of destruction activated exactly on schedule. The bombardment began at 0600 hours, precisely as promised. The artillery opened up with the methodical precision of a factory assembly line. American 155 mm howitzers began pounding the fortress walls, but this wasn't random destruction. Each battery had specific targeting assignments. The northern wall, facing the main American approach, received concentrated fire designed to create breaches. The main gate was targeted for complete destruction. Known artillery positions inside the fortress were hit with counter-battery fire. The sound would have been absolutely overwhelming. Each 155mm shell produced a thunderclap explosion. With multiple batteries firing in coordinated salvos, the noise became a continuous, skull-rattling roar that made communication nearly impossible without shouting. Inside the fortress, German defenders experienced what soldiers throughout history have described as one of warfare's most terrifying experiences: being on the receiving end of heavy bombardment with no ability to respond effectively. Stone walls that had stood for centuries began to crack and crumble under the repeated impacts. Sections of parapet collapsed, crushing defensive positions. Shrapnel whined through the air, forcing soldiers to take cover in whatever shelter they could find. German artillery crews tried to return fire, but American counter-battery procedures were devastatingly effective. German guns would fire, their muzzle flashes would be spotted by forward observers, and within minutes, American shells were landing on their positions with lethal accuracy. German gunners quickly learned that shooting back meant death. After 2 hours of this punishment, during which thousands of pounds of high explosives had been systematically applied to the fortress, the airstrikes arrived. P-47. Thunderbolts came in low, their characteristic engine roar announcing their approach. Each aircraft carried a mix of 500-pound bombs and rockets. The pilots weren't attacking area targets. They were hitting specific structures identified by ground observers using smoke markers. The Major's command bunker took 3 direct hits. The first bomb penetrated the roof, the explosion collapsing portions of the underground chamber. Subsequent hits ensured nothing inside could have survived. The main ammunition storage area was struck by rockets, triggering secondary explosions that sent debris hundreds of feet into the air and shook the entire fortress to its foundations. German soldiers not directly in the blast zone were knocked off their feet by the shockwave. The main gate, already damaged by artillery, was obliterated completely when a 500-pound bomb landed directly in front of it, creating a massive breach in the fortress defenses. Throughout this assault, the loudspeakers continued their broadcasts. Soldiers of the German garrison, your command structure has been destroyed. Your defenses are breached. Continued resistance is suicide. Exit through the main gate with hands raised. You will not be harmed. And then something began to happen that the Major had not anticipated. His soldiers started surrendering. First, a few individuals slipped out through damaged sections of wall, hands raised high, walking slowly toward American lines. They were immediately taken into custody, searched, given water, and escorted to rear areas. Then small groups, a squad here, a half-dozen men there, soldiers who decided that their Major's honor wasn't worth their lives. The Major tried to stop this. According to survivor testimony, he ordered guards to shoot anyone attempting to surrender. Some shots were fired, though whether anyone was actually killed by their own side remains unclear. But this brutality only accelerated the collapse of morale. German soldiers realized they were trapped between American firepower outside and their own fanatical commander inside. One was trying to kill them, the other was trying to prevent them from escaping. The choice became obvious. By mid-morning, perhaps 3 hours into the bombardment, the fortress was no longer a coherent defensive position. It was a smoking ruin with scattered groups of dazed defenders huddling in whatever cover remained. That's when the infantry assault began. American infantry units moved forward from multiple directions simultaneously, exploiting the breaches created by artillery and airstrikes. They weren't charging into withering defensive fire. They were methodically clearing a position that had already been largely destroyed. Sherman tanks rolled up to point-blank range and fired directly into openings in the walls, their 75mm guns acting as bunker busters. Flamethrowers cleared any remaining strong points where German soldiers were still attempting resistance. Combat engineers used satchel charges and Bangalore torpedoes to collapse defensive positions. But the remarkable thing was how little actual fighting occurred. The bombardment had been so thorough, the psychological pressure so intense, that organized resistance had largely collapsed. Small groups of German soldiers would fire a few shots, then surrender when American infantry closed in. Others simply waited in their positions with weapons laid aside, ready to give up as soon as American troops reached them. The loudspeakers followed the advancing infantry, continuing to broadcast surrender appeals, making it clear that laying down weapons meant safety, while continued fighting meant death. Section by section, room by room, bunker by bunker, American forces cleared the fortress. Some areas surrendered without a shot being fired. Others required brief firefights before defenders gave up. Only a handful of positions required actual combat to overcome. The systematic preparation had reduced what should have been a costly assault to something closer to a cleanup operation. The major's determination to fight to the death had evaporated among his troops when faced with the reality of what fighting to the death actually meant. By early afternoon, less than 12 hours after the bombardment began, the fortress was in American hands. The major himself was found in what remained of his command bunker. Despite direct bomb hits, portions of the underground structure had survived, and the major had barricaded himself inside with a handful of troops who had remained loyal, either out of conviction or fear. When American infantry breached the position, using explosives to clear debris blocking the entrance, they found the major and perhaps 6 or 7 soldiers in the semi-darkness of the damaged bunker. According to the after-action report, the major was armed with a pistol. When American troops entered, he raised the weapon and aimed it at them. An American sergeant, his name lost to history, just another professional soldier doing his job, shot the major. Not dramatically, not after exchanging words or speeches, just professionally eliminated the threat. The major collapsed. His death was probably instantaneous, or nearly so. He'd said Patton would have to kill him to take the fortress. That's exactly what happened, though it was a sergeant who pulled the trigger rather than Patton personally. The German soldiers with the major immediately surrendered. Whatever loyalty or fear had kept them at their commander's side evaporated the moment he fell. They had followed orders to the end, but once their commander was dead, they had no interest in continuing a fight that had already been lost. They were disarmed, searched, and escorted out of the bunker to join the hundreds of other German prisoners being assembled in the fortress courtyard. American medics moved through the prisoners, providing medical care to the wounded. This was standard procedure, Geneva Convention requirements, but also practical military policy. Treating enemy wounded demonstrated to other German units that surrender to Americans meant safety, encouraging future surrenders. The final tally was brutal. American casualties, minimal. A few wounded from sporadic German fire during the assault. 0 killed. German casualties, approximately 200 dead, mostly from the bombardment and airstrikes. Another 300 wounded, some seriously. The remaining 1,000 or so surrendered as prisoners of war. The fortress the major had sworn to defend to his last breath had fallen in less than half a day. The overwhelming application of firepower had reduced what could have been a week-long siege to a single morning's work. The major had believed his defiance would matter, that his willingness to die would inspire his troops or at least make the Americans pay a price for their advance. Instead, his defiance had simply determined the intensity and speed of the attack. His death changed nothing strategically. The fortress fell anyway. The road junction was in American hands by nightfall. Patton's advance continued without meaningful delay. All the major had accomplished was getting hundreds of his men killed or wounded for a position that was doomed from the moment Patton decided to take it. Patton toured the captured fortress the following day. According to officers who accompanied him, he showed no satisfaction, no gloating over his victory. He was matter-of-fact, almost businesslike, as he walked through the rubble and examined the damage. "The major said we'd have to kill him," Patton reportedly remarked. "We did. That's what happens when you challenge people to do what they were planning to do anyway." But Patton also made a point during that tour that revealed something important about his character. He visited the aid stations where wounded German prisoners were being treated. He ensured they were receiving proper medical care, that American medics were treating German wounded with the same attention as American casualties. He wanted his troops to see this, to understand that once the fighting stopped, enemies became prisoners deserving proper treatment. There was no contradiction in Patton's mind between ruthless efficiency in combat and professional humanity afterward. Be absolutely brutal when necessary. Be professionally humane when possible. Never blur the line between the two. Word of what happened at the fortress spread rapidly through both American and German forces, and the story took on different meanings depending on who was hearing it. For American troops, it reinforced what they already knew about Patton. He would use overwhelming force when required, but he always tried diplomacy first. He gave enemies every chance to surrender. If they refused, what came next was their choice, not his. For German forces, the message was more complex and far more chilling. The story wasn't just that another fortress had fallen. That was happening all over France in September 1944. It was how completely and how systematically it fell. How Patton had taken a commander's defiant challenge literally and methodically fulfilled it. How 12 hours of precisely coordinated firepower had reduced a strong position to rubble while minimizing American casualties. German intelligence reports began circulating the story as a warning. When Third Army units offer surrender, you take it seriously. Because refusing means Patton will do exactly what he says he'll do, no more, no less, but with devastating efficiency. Some German officers later stated in prisoner interrogations that they had surrendered to American forces specifically because they had heard about the fortress incident. They had learned that Patton's ultimatums weren't opening negotiating positions. They were statements of fact. Challenge him, and he'll accept the challenge. Dare him to destroy you, and he will, with professional thoroughness. This was psychological warfare at its most effective, not through propaganda or exaggeration, but through demonstrated truth. Patton meant exactly what he said, every single time. The predictability was almost more terrifying than random violence. You knew exactly what would happen if you refused surrender. The choice was yours, and so were the consequences. When American intelligence officers examined the fortress after the battle, they found revealing evidence about conditions inside before the assault. Notes from junior officers questioning the major's decision to fight. Suggestions that surrender might be the prudent course. Evidence that the major had rejected all these suggestions. Signs that soldiers had been executed for attempting to surrender before the assault even began. The major had been so committed to his defiant stand that he'd killed his own men to enforce it. Indications that morale had collapsed days before the actual battle. The major's dramatic oath hadn't inspired his troops. It had trapped them with a commander who'd rather see them die than surrender. Looking back at the fortress battle, it's worth considering what the major's defiance actually accomplished. If he'd accepted Patton's initial surrender offer, all 500 of his troops would have survived. They'd have spent the rest of the war in prisoner of war camps. Not pleasant, but safe. Many would have returned home to their families when Germany surrendered in May 1945. Instead, 200 died. 300 were wounded, some maimed for life. The remaining 1,000 still ended up as prisoners anyway. And for what? The fortress fell in less than a day. The road junction was in American hands within hours. Patton's advance wasn't delayed. Nothing strategic was accomplished. The major had confused dramatic gestures with effective leadership. There's a deeper lesson in this story that extends far beyond military tactics or World War II history. It's about what happens when you make dramatic statements without considering whether your audience will take you literally. You'll have to kill me. Over my dead body. I'll never surrender. These phrases sound powerful when you say them. They feel heroic. They make you seem principled and uncompromising. In movies and books, they're the lines that define character and inspire others. But some people will take you at your word. Patton was one of those people. He didn't interpret defiant challenges as theater or negotiating tactics. He interpreted them as statements of preference. You want to fight to the death? Okay, that can be arranged. You're insisting I'll have to kill you? Fine, let's proceed with that plan. This created a kind of terrible logic. If you state your terms clearly, and your opponent accepts those terms and acts on them, whose responsibility is the outcome? The major stated clearly that only death would make him surrender the fortress. Patton provided death efficiently and professionally. The major got exactly what he'd asked for. Is that brutality, or is it simply taking someone seriously? This raises uncomfortable questions about leadership and responsibility. Should Patton have tried harder to persuade the major? Should he have been more reluctant to kill someone who was essentially committing suicide by soldier? Should he have conducted a slower, more careful operation that might have given the major more opportunities to change his mind? Or was Patton right to respect the Major's stated choice? Was there something almost honorable about granting an enemy exactly what he requested, even when that request was death? The answer probably depends on your philosophy of leadership and personal responsibility. But the practical outcome is undeniable. The Major made his choice. Patton honored that choice. Hundreds of German soldiers paid the price for their commander's dramatic statement. This lesson applies far beyond military contexts. In business, in politics, in personal relationships, when you make absolute statements, you'd better be prepared for someone to take you literally. I'll resign if this doesn't work. I'll never compromise on this principle. If you do that, we're finished. These statements might be meant as emphatic expressions of feeling or as negotiating tactics to show strength, but some people will hear them as literal commitments and act accordingly. And when they do, you can't complain that you didn't really mean it. The fortress fell in September 1944. The German major died there as he had promised. The war continued for 8 more months before Germany's final surrender in May 1945. The major's name isn't widely remembered today. The exact location of the fortress matters less than what happened there. Most historical accounts of Patton's Third Army don't mention this specific incident, but the lesson endures. With certain people, dramatic defiance doesn't prolong anything. It just changes the intensity of what comes next. Other commanders might have been insulted by, "You'll have to kill me," and tried to prove they weren't monsters by offering better terms or conducting a careful, casualty-averse operation that preserved enemy lives. Patton simply took it as a statement of preference and acted accordingly with professional efficiency. There's something coldly logical about this approach. The Major stated his terms. Only death would make him surrender. Patton provided those terms. No anger, no personal animosity, just professional execution of a military task. The Major got exactly what he'd asked for. In the end, the fortress battle teaches us one of warfare's harshest lessons. Heroic gestures matter far less than overwhelming force properly applied. The German major thought his defiant stand would mean something, that his willingness to die would inspire his troops, make the Americans hesitate, or at least ensure that if the fortress fell, it would fall at a terrible cost to the attackers. He was wrong on every count. His troops weren't inspired. They were trapped by his decision. The Americans didn't hesitate. They simply applied more firepower. The fortress fell quickly, and the only terrible cost was paid by the Germans themselves. Patton's response to the Major's challenge revealed something fundamental about his character and his approach to warfare. He didn't see challenges as deterrence. He saw them as permission. "You'll have to kill me" wasn't a warning that made Patton more cautious. It was authorization to proceed with maximum efficiency. The Major had explicitly stated his terms. Patton simply honored those terms with professional thoroughness. This pragmatic, almost clinical approach to warfare made Patton one of the most effective generals of World War II. He understood that war isn't about grand gestures or heroic last stands. It's about achieving objectives as efficiently as possible, minimizing friendly casualties, and using overwhelming force when enemies refuse reasonable alternatives. The fortress battle also demonstrated the power of giving enemies clear choices with predictable consequences. Every German commander who heard this story learned a lesson. When Patton offers surrender, take it seriously. His terms are fair, but refusing them means he'll do exactly what he says, with devastating efficiency. Some might find this approach harsh or even cruel. But consider the alternative. How many more lives would have been lost if Patton had conducted a cautious, prolonged siege? How many American soldiers would have died in a careful assault designed to minimize German casualties? The Major made his choice. Patton honored that choice. The consequences were tragic, but predictable. So, here's the question for you. Do you think Patton should have tried harder to avoid killing the Major? Should he have shown more reluctance to fulfill a suicidal request? Or was the Major's death entirely his own responsibility, the natural consequence of his own choices? Was Patton brutal, or was he simply professional? Was the Major honorable, or was he wasteful of his men's lives? Is there any real difference between offering someone death and accepting their request for it? These aren't easy questions. They touch on fundamental issues of leadership, responsibility, and the ethics of warfare. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into World War II history, leadership lessons from history's greatest commanders, and stories about the consequences of dramatic statements, hit that subscribe button right now. Because history isn't just about what happened. It's about understanding why it happened, what it teaches us, and how those lessons apply to our lives today. The fortress still stands in France, largely restored now, a tourist destination with plaques describing its history through centuries of warfare. Visitors walk through the same gates that American troops breached in September 1944. They see the thick walls that couldn't withstand modern firepower. They stand where the German major made his final stand. But most don't know the full story of what happened there. They don't know about the challenge, the response, and the 12 hours that proved you should be very, very careful about what you dare someone to do. Because some people will take you at your word. And Patton always did. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.